All right, we had a handicap tag on our van that we were driving around, and so we got to park in handicap spots, which meant that we had to leave. We didn't have to leave as early, and we got there in plenty of time and all that stuff. So it was interesting because while we were pulling into Gwinnett Center, into the parking area, like we kind of waved the handicap parking tag for the parking attendant to let him know that we wanted to be directed to our better parking. And so the guy, with absolutely no discretion at all, just kind of yells down the parking garage, "Hey, he's handicapped!" And like, we all thought it was funny because it's like no discretion at all in hiding the fact that Daniel had a cane, which, you know, so that was kind of funny. That was really entertaining. My biggest takeaway from Catalyst was, it sounds cliche because it was the theme, but be present. And I think, what I took away from that was to really be all in where you are, to not have the things that God has given you, whether it be like a job or relationships or church or any of that, to not put that on the back burner even for a second. I think the reason is, and at least this is how it really spoke to me, was when we do that, when we really go all in, we find God to be that much more reliable, because He doesn't just endorse what we've done. We really take on and we champion His cause, which is something that's a lot bigger than just showing up for work or just showing up and crossing some things off on a to-do list. And then we also find out a lot more about ourselves and our weak points and our strengths, and we watch God fill those things in. Kind of when we don't do that, it's interesting too, because when we really just kind of show up half-heartedly or we kind of meander through things, we find ourselves, the word that came away from that was memorizing God. When we just kind of go through emotions, we memorize what we're supposed to do, and we're not being fresh, and we're not being creative, and we're not being innovative. And God really wants that from us, no matter what our role is. So being fully present means taking those risks and to be innovative and to show up.
I think for me the most memorable moment from Catalyst was after Katie Davis explained her story of how she moved to Uganda when she was 19, and she's 22 now, and she's adopted, during that span of time, she's adopted 13 little girls. And so she went through and told her story about how that happened and how the Lord's just worked incredible and just brought these girls into her life and just using her in a great way with her ministry in Uganda. Right after she went through her story and explained it at Catalyst, they brought up two of her little girls. I think it was Grace and what was the other one? Anyway, it was like Patricia or something. Anyway, they brought up two of her little girls, and the organizers of Catalyst came up and presented her with college scholarships for all 13 of her girls. So when they get a little bit older, they'll pay for all their college. So it was just an awesome moment, and just the expression on her face and just her gracious attitude throughout the whole thing was just amazing. Okay, I think for me the biggest takeaway from Catalyst was actually it was something that was discussed throughout each of the different presentations in different ways, but it was especially highlighted in Mark Driscoll's presentation on fear. And one thing that he really hit home for me was his discussion and just teaching on stress, and how really we just have to call it what it is, and it's fear of people, and fear of failure. And honestly, as a Christian, I think sometimes we, at least for me personally, I think stress is an okay thing. It's something that, helps me do better, and even though, as long as we keep it down to a certain level. But for me, I think what really impacted me was just being reminded that stress is actually fear, and that's not something we should excuse away or be okay with, but it's something that we just need to commit to the Lord, and so that we can serve the Lord better in whatever position we may have in ministry.
My biggest takeaway from Catalyst really is the talk that Andy Stanley gave, and he was talking about how as pastors and leaders of ministries, we can easily rest on our laurels about how our ministry is impacting the community around us and whatever, but how as leaders we need to personally be invested in reaching out and connecting to those who are lost. And I really appreciated not only his heart on that personally in the story that he gave about his ministry journey, but also just the impact it had on me and really thinking about how am I personally invested in evangelizing and reaching out to people who don't know Jesus and allowing that to inform how I lead others and lead a ministry. And so very impactful, and I'm very glad I was there.
So my favorite moment from Catalyst actually happened in O'Hare Airport. We went up to where you check in and you give them your bags, and the guy behind the counter is like, "Where are you going today?" And I told him we're going to Atlanta and going there for a conference, and he goes, "Yep, not today." And I was a little shocked and asked him, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Your flight's been canceled, so you're not going there today." And I was just like, "Oh." And I thought to myself, "Michaela, you're always so gullible, so he's got to be joking with you." So I looked up and I said, "That's really funny, I'm pretty gullible." And he goes, "No, I'm serious. Your flight's been canceled." And so Brandon comes up and he's like, "What's going on?" And I said, "He said our flight's canceled. We're not going to Atlanta today." And the guy's like, "Well, actually there's a 3:30 flight and there's 2 seats on it. You guys could take those." And Brandon's like, "We'll take them," even though there were 4 people in our party. Sorry, Catherine and Daniel. And so we hand him our licenses to get the new tickets, and he goes, "Oh, I'm just kidding with you guys. You're going to Atlanta on your original flight. Don't worry about it." So favorite memory was getting punked in O'Hare Airport on our way to Atlanta. My biggest takeaway from Catalyst, I could say there were probably about 1,000 while I was there for those 2 days, but the biggest one actually didn't hit me until a couple weeks later. And had a really great conversation with my husband. We were talking about some dreams we have for the future and ministry that God's placed on our hearts. And afterwards I was praying to God, just like, why aren't we there yet? Why can't we do those things yet? And just really yearning for that point in our life. And the next day I came into work and I was going through a couple things on my desk, and I found my Catalyst notebook and sort of thumbed through it and landed on a page about being present in the current season of life that God has you. And really struck me that God has great things He's teaching me in this season, and specific ways He's growing me in this season that are preparing me for the next. And so not to be discontent with where I am, even though the yearning and the desire for the ministry that God's given to me is a good thing. Always yearning for the next is not, because He has me here in the present and He's teaching me something here in the present, and that's really where my heart needs to be. And so being present in the current season of life, definitely my biggest takeaway.